So my lesson plan today is for an 8th grade classroom, 8th grade algebra classroom, and it's going to be going over how to graph horizontal and vertical lines when given an x and a y equation. The Common Core State Standard is analyze and solve pairs of simultaneous linear equations. There wasn't an essential element that was applicable, meaning that there wasn't an essential element that correlated with the content of the state standard. So I decided just to use the state standard for all of the tiers of students. So go down to lesson objectives. I have it tiered. My above target students will be able to graph horizontal and vertical lines when given an x equals equation and y equals equation with 90% accuracy with the use of a graphic organizer and notes from their interactive notebook. Their interactive notebook is part of the commentary, which I'll explain later. And my target students will be able to graph horizontal and vertical lines when given an x equation and a y equation with 80% accuracy with the use of a graphic organizer and notes from their interactive notebook. My target students that need accommodations, it's the same, except the only thing that's different for these students is during direct instruction, they are given a graphic organizer that's already partially filled in for them. So they don't have to focus on writing notes, but instead just focusing on, what the teacher is explaining. My students that are below target that need modifications, they're still learning the same content, so they're still expected to graph horizontal and vertical lines when given an x equals equation, y equals equation. The only thing is they're only expected to master 60% of the content, or 60% accuracy, with the use, again, of their graphic organizer and interactive notebook. So if you go down at my lesson assessments, I have 2 informal assessments for this lesson. The first one is part of the anticipatory set. It's the warm-up. It looks like this. I don't know if you can see that. Handout 3, and I included it below the lesson plan. It is like they're just going to be doing, like, the problems were up on the smartboard and the students were just using their whiteboards to graph for those. So the teacher would be able to get informal assessment by walking around and also seeing who's able to graph the table on the whiteboard and who isn't. My second informal assessment is handout 5, which is part of their notes for the day, and again, it's just practice problems, and the students are just using their whiteboard to graph these problems, and it's part of guided instruction and collaborative instruction and independent instruction. But again, the teacher would be able to tell, what students were struggling or that needed help just based on, like, student questions, and also looking around to see who is able to graph the horizontal and vertical lines on their whiteboard. And then the only formal assessment I have, which would be the homework I would be having the students turn in to me, is handout 1, and it looks like this, and all it is horizontal and vertical practice problems. There's a front and a back, and it's homework, and I would just have it due before the quiz. So they have a couple days to complete it, but I do have it tiered. I do have the formal assessment tiered. So my above target students, again, they have to graph horizontal and vertical lines with 90% accuracy, so I'd be looking to make sure that they were able to graph horizontal and vertical lines with 90% accuracy on that homework assignment. And again, they can use their notes from the interactive notebook. My target students and target students that need accommodations, again, I'm holding them, they still need to be able to graph horizontal and vertical lines with 80% accuracy. My target students that need accommodations, they're going to be using their graphic organizer from their interactive notebook. And my below target Needing accommodations, these students will be able to graph horizontal and vertical lines when given an x equals equation and y equals equation with only 60% accuracy, with the use of their graphic organizer from their interactive notebook. So if we go down to instruction, previous skills and knowledge, students have had previous instruction graphing equations from a table that they had done the previous day in their lesson, was solving for inequalities, and then putting those into a table and then graphing the coordinates, like graphing the ordered pairs and putting that into a graph. And then students are familiar with working with equations that include variables, so x equals, y equals, and they've had lots of instruction on how to solve. So I have my anticipatory set, my attention signal, my informal assessment, again, which is handout 3. It's students we ask to do 2 review problems as a warm-up. Students will be using their whiteboards to graph the warm-up review problems. So again, it's informal, I'm not collecting anything, it's just the students have to complete it on the whiteboard, and the teacher would be able to just kind of look around and see who's able to complete the 2 practice problems on their whiteboard, what graphs, what lines, graphed lines look correct, which ones don't. So students are given 5 minutes to complete those problems independently or with their table partner, and then the teacher and class come back as a whole to discuss how you would graph the 2 problems. So after that, after the teacher and students have worked collaboratively to explain how you would plot the points and then graph, the teacher will ask probing questions that will start to reveal that the first graph has a horizontal line, which you can see from handout 3, all of the x's are the same. And then the second practice problem, all the y's are the same, have the same value. So the teacher will ask probing questions and start to reveal that the horizontal graph has all the x's have all the same value, and then the vertical line graph is all of the same y values. I'm not going to read through the probing questions, but they're on my lesson plan. Because I'll introduce the commentary. So the commentary is called an interactive notebook, and this is actually a real thing. My field study students use it in their 8th grade algebra classroom, so instead of having a textbook, the teacher thought that the textbook was just too hard for 8th grade algebra. It was really made for like a 9th grade high school level. So instead she puts together these things called interactive notebooks, and the students get them every quarter. So this notebook was from the 2nd quarter. It had just started when we I think we were into our 3rd lesson. Hoivox was our 3rd lesson, so this lesson was only the 3rd lesson in the 2nd quarter. So each quarter has its own reference pages, so functions, graphing functions, inequalities, writing equations, and then also there's a part in here that explains how to plot a point and graph. So that would be helpful for today if they're confused on how to graph a line or plot a point and graph a line. They can always look back to their reference sheets, which is in the front of their interactive notebook. So these are lessons that they've already completed in their 2nd quarter: one-step inequalities, multi-step, graphing linear equations. This is the previous lesson. So I have that included in the commentary for the students to look back to, especially when they're solving their warm-up. It shows how to take coordinates from a table and graph those coordinates. It explains how you do it. And then on the other side, there's 2 more practice problems. You have a table, you have your x and y values, you have your coordinates, and then just plotting those coordinates on a graph. So this is like, I think I called it Notes or Graphic Organizer for Interactive Notebook 1, and this is 2. So this is from the previous day's lesson that they could always refer back to for today's lesson if they need help graphing. So that's the anticipatory set. So I'm going to go into the instructional sequence with direct instruction. So again, the teacher is going to go from anticipatory to direct instruction, saying yesterday we learned how to graph from a table. Today we'll be learning how to graph horizontal and vertical lines. Teacher will be handing out a graphic organizer for today's lesson. So this is how I differentiated my lesson. My students that are on target that need accommodations and my students that are below target that need modifications are given a graphic organizer that's partially completed and cut out for them. So it looks like this, which this is horizontal Hoy and Vux, and I included, I have that upside down, I included that, I think it's handout 2. And so these students, a lot of these students have trouble organizing their notes, so it's really nice to give them notes that are partially filled in, so all they have to do is kind of fill in the answer instead of writing it all down. And they don't have to really worry about cutting anything out, whereas my students at target and above target are given something that looks like this, and they're required to cut out each big box and then write down all of the notes that the teacher has. So theirs isn't partially filled in. They have to complete it without anything being filled in for them. So I guess I'll show you when it's completed. It looks like this in their notes. So I'm going to go over the Hoy first because that's what it says in my lesson plan, and that's what I did when I taught this lesson. So teacher will start a think aloud. So the teacher will explain Hoy. That Hoy is an acronym for H for horizontal lines. The graph will be a horizontal line. So H for horizontal, O for 0 in 0 slope. Horizontal lines have a 0 slope, which is your rise over run, which they know about. We've talked about rise over run before. There's our slope. And then y, or y equals. Your equations always look like y equals in a horizontal or a Hoy problem. So after the teacher gets done talking about and writing down notes for Hoy, and the students have to copy the same thing in their notes that the teacher is doing, it's put on a dot cam, and the teacher writes the notes. The students have to copy it. Then they move on to VUX, which again is another acronym. V for vertical. The graph will be a vertical line up and down. U for undefined. Vertical lines have an undefined slope, which they know about. We've talked about it before. And X, because all of the equations look like X equals. So Hoy and VUX. This is kind of a short description on what the students would copy down for direct instruction. All they're supposed to be doing is copying down the notes that the teacher is writing down. And again, it's nice for those students that are at target that need modifications or below target, that their notes are already kind of partially filled in for them already. So all they have to do is just write down just certain aspects of the notes. They can focus on paying attention to what the teacher is saying. So after that part of direct instruction, the teacher will review and help students remember how to graph vertical and horizontal lines by teaching them karate moves. I put this in just because my 8th graders are always telling me how boring math can be, which it can be because all you're really doing is taking notes and practicing problems. So I had the students stand up and they had to practice Hoy. So Hoy looked like Hoy for horizontal, and then V, Vux, Vux for vertical. So I had them do that a couple times just to they thought it was fun, and just to get them moving and not just sitting in their seat the entire time. And again, after those karate moves, the students will glue their graphic organizers that either looked like this or this, depending on what tier they're at, into their interactive notebook, which their interactive notebook looks the same as my interactive notebook. So that was all part of direct instruction. Move to guided instruction. So the students will be given a booklet that provides practice graphing horizontal and vertical lines, handout 5, which at the end goes right here in their notes. I took mine out so I could show you because I only had one copy of it. So when they put it in their notebook, it looks like a little booklet, and you open it up to reveal practice problems. So for the collaborative instruction, the teacher will solve the first 2 practice problems. So the teacher is going to solve them. And again, the teacher can ask prompting questions from the students. But all the students should really be doing is just copying down what the teacher is doing. The teacher is showing them, it's for guided, the teacher is showing them how to solve these problems. I have that in my lesson plan. Then we move on to collaborative instruction. So there's a total of 6 practice problems. So after the first two the teacher is going to do, which is in guided instruction. The next 2 is going to be in collaborative instruction, where the teacher, the students will be required to first try and solve these 2 practice problems on their own using their whiteboard. After about 5 minutes, I asked for student volunteers to solve these 2 on the smartboard. Then the teacher and students went over how to graph the horizontal lines together, horizontal and vertical lines together. Trying to think. And then again, they can always refer back to their notes that were taken earlier in direct instruction that kind of tell you how to go about graphing x equals equations and y equals equations. So they can always look back to their interactive notebook, which is part of the commentary. Then the rest is independent instruction. We didn't have a ton of time for independent instruction, so I only had the students solve the last 2 practice problems independently. The students that got done, normally my students that are above target and at target get done quicker than my students that are at target with accommodations and below target that need modifications. So once those students were done and they could show me that they knew how to solve and graph x and y equals equations, and then they were given the homework. But this is a good time for the teacher to work with those students that are struggling, that are below target, or struggling with the content. So again, teacher walks around just to provide support to those who are struggling. And the students always have access to their interactive notebook and their graphic organizer from earlier. So I think that's it for instructional sequence. Then just closure, just really short. The teacher provides a short review of the karate moves. So the teacher and students do that really fast. And then teacher will provide a short preview of what the students will be doing the following day, which is the following day just have them do stations. So the teacher would be explaining what stations the students would be in and what groups would start where. Yeah, and so that's it. Kind of a lot, but try to include my commentary and lesson plan. So